Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here tonight with you. And because I'm a professor, I have to have a watch, or I might just talk forever. It's a welcome to this presentation based largely on the book that was published in 2008, Are We There Yet? I'm currently writing a new book called No Vacancy, The Rise and Fall of American Motels. And when I get that together, maybe I'll ask them if I can come back. We have such marvelous motels here, and I have spent some time taking pictures along Fremont Avenue. So, by show of hands, or how many of you went on vacation as a child? All right. Now I'd like you to tell me really quickly something you remember from that vacation. Just shout it out. You don't need to be called on. No seatbelts, just being able to stick your head out the window. I remember that. What else do you remember? No AC. Swimming pools, big deal. Swimming pools and motels. That's how you picked a motel, right? Swimming pools. What else? Remember what? The magic finger beds. And do you know when the queen bed was invented? 1964. So these are the kinds of things that we need to know to keep civilization going. And people like me do it. And actually, I found out about magic fingers, too. They go between the mattress. I always wondered as a child where those magic fingers came from. So let's go on our road trip here today. So this is a cover of my book, Are We There Yet?, that I will sign. And this is another book that I have written. This is a picture book suitable for people who prefer pictures. Collected. There's pictures of me and my husband at Disneyland, separately, of course. We didn't know each other until we were quite a bit older. But we are of the Disneyland generation, and I hope some of you are too. So let's go back to, this is the family, the Farnsworth family, the only family picture I can find where the family is loaded up and ready to go on vacation. This is a 1962 photograph of this family. And look at them. They've got their VW camper and all of their stuff on top. And you got to love those glasses. The Madras shirts. This guy was a professor, and their granddaughter was a student of mine and helped me on the green book here. So I began writing this book because I'm a historian of families. My first book was about the family farm in Illinois, and as my husband said, if you're having insomnia, you can pick up that book, but it got her tenure, so not a big deal. And after spending a lot of time researching this book, spending months at a time at a motel in the cornfields of Illinois, I said to myself, my next book, I'm going to pick a topic where there's civilization. So I said, I want to stay in a place where there's at least a McDonald's, which is my marker of civilization because I'm a baby boomer. So that's what I picked. I picked the idea of trying to figure out how families behaved over time by looking at their vacations, not at divorce statistics, birth rates, whatever that critics like to use. I wanted to see how families worked together. So I argue in this book that the family road trip is a middle-class invention of the post-war era. So if we look at the post-war era and you see this picture of the family, what do you notice about this picture? What's here? A TV. We grew up with TV. A veteran, a soldier. So this is a time when the vets came home from the war, the GIs came home from the war, they're on the GI Bill. This is the 50s. Times are prosperous. People were moving to the suburbs. And in that wonderful, beautiful suburban house, you needed a television, a car, a range, a refrigerator. So this is the era of the consumer good. And families were buying a lot of consumer goods. Union workers had earned, before the war, vacation benefits, 2 weeks paid vacation, just like their bosses had. And so they had time to go on vacation. Mom was home taking care of the kids. And in addition to this prosperity that made it possible for them to take vacations, the government in 1956 decided to construct the interstate highway system. So these ribbons of roadway, as they were called, began to unfold all around America with their clover leaves, and you could get pretty far in a car. This is before mass airline travel. Airline travel was fairly expensive, and with no seatbelts, you could fit any number of children in the car. My parents had 7 children, and once we took a trip with my aunt and my cousin, 9 of us in a Corvair. We were fine, you know? The crayons all melted, but we got across the desert. How? Well, in those days, you would drive across the desert at night. So you could throw everybody in the car. Gas was 28 cents a gallon, cost $3 a night to stay at a motel. Pretty cheap vacation. And if you could stand to put up with your wife's relatives, you could stay there too. So along comes America's greatest invention, the station wagon. Station wagons were $2,000. By mid-1950s, they're on the roadways, the wood-paneled ones. You could fit everybody in there, including the dog. So here is the first advertisement that I could find for a Ford Ranch wagon. And there's always room for one more. Of course, no seatbelts, no car seats. It's like that Volkswagen ad. You can stuff as many people as you want in there. And so that's how people went on vacation, in these cars. Cars were seen as being able to take family vacationers on an educational trip, as you see in this ad from Ford, America's Schoolhouse on Wheels. And these are from the Ford archives at Dearborn, Michigan. And this brings us to the question, well, why did families go on vacation? Sure, they had money and they had time, but why did they go? And one of the main reasons they went on vacation was to educate their children. Vacations were seen as educational. I myself visited a number of ghost towns on vacation as a child. And a prime destination for children on vacations was to go cross country to Washington, D.C. And to do that, you had to patronize the gas stations. The oil companies were all into this vacationing thing. They provided free maps. Now, do any of you remember getting a free map? Okay, then you're old like me, right? Because free maps went away in the early 70s. But they would be begging you to take these maps because you would follow the roads on the maps and you would need to buy gas and thus consume more oil. And one of the features that they began to add to these fueling stations were clean restrooms. And as you can see in this image from this map, the idea of the clean restroom is that women will use them. Women would not patronize dirty restrooms. And it's so clean, she can even take in her daughter. So restroom pictures are always with women and daughters, just to assure you that they're hygienic, that you can go to the restroom there in that gas station, and thus buy gas, and thus enrich the oil companies. State Farm Insurance also gave to all its agents this atlas. Atlases are wonderful historical documents. And in this particular atlas, you can notice symbols, a symbol for each state. I call these pictogram maps, and this was very popular in the time period. And today, we would not think it was very funny to have pickaninnies dancing with cotton. You wouldn't do that today. But this is the era before any kind of regard for people's identity. And these symbols, a factory for Chicago, that probably wouldn't go over either. So this is taking American identity and boiling it down to these little symbols for you so you would know where you were going. And often families stayed in motels. And this is a beautiful picture from the collection here, the Rancho Anita Motel. I have to say it looks a lot better in the dark, the picture. And these early motels were modeled after tourist courts. And the tourist courts, many of them started as just little cabins. And in the late 30s and 40s, they began to put a single roof over these cabins, creating a unified roof line. And the early motor courts also had a garage for your car. So Rancho Anita and these other kinds of motels started as places to service the family traveler. And why were they so great for the family traveler? Because you didn't have to comb your hair, you didn't have to shave, the kids were a mess after a day in the car in the heat. You just opened the back, shoved them in the door, and you never had to go in the lobby. No one ever had to see you. So from private domestic space, you go to private domestic space in the motel. Another motel, another picture from this collection is the Gateway Motel. We have a Gateway Motel in Salt Lake City. It was featured in the world's fastest Indian movie about the motorcycles. And it looked great when they painted it for the film. Now it looks terrible again. But these motels have become something else, which is another story. And many motels, like this motel, the Lucky Motel in Las Vegas, use local place names. Lucky, Paradise, whatever, these motels try to reference the local culture. That's one way in which you know that they were local creations put together by local money. Well, the fantastic motel is the Blue Angel Motel, and I think I was here in town when they raised it, but I think the sculpture is still there. The sculpture is still there. So this is being a landmark on Fremont, well-known. What I don't know is, was it built because of the movie? Is there any connection? Does anybody know that? The Marlene Dietrich movie? Well, anyway. So the Blue Motel, another landmark here. And look carefully at the verticality of that sign in the front. Motels early on were typically one story. You could pull up in your car, very unified roof line, but out in front is this incredibly vertical sign that's tall. And why is that? Because there's no such thing as internet reservations. You just drive along and you pull in with the sign. So the architecture of the signs and the signs that you see here was tremendously important marketing. And you notice that clearly in this. This motel is even saying, come in, there's arrows pointing in. How could you not obey that sign? Eventually, Holiday Inn in the late 50s and early 60s came along and created its own unified sign and its own chain of motels, and the era of chain motels began. And some see this, well, one aspect of this that is clearly to be lamented was the loss of local culture in the signs and the names. But it's not that we cease to have family motel ownerships, because many of these are franchised. So the Holiday Inn still maintained franchises and families ran the motels. So people went on vacations. I talked a little bit about where they stayed. In this era, it's really pre-McDonald's. There were some Howard Johnsons, but there's really not a lot of national chains. My mother brought along the Scotch Plaid cooler or a box with mayo and bologna and bread. You ate that on vacation. So you had to feed yourself as you went along, especially if you were on a budget like our family was. Well, why would you take your children to Washington, D.C.? That's just the axiomatic #1 trip that people go on. And they would drive across the country to take their children because they wanted their children to know that they were citizens. And this particular family, the Weitzman family, is my daughter-in-law's family. This is her mother, is that little girl there, standing at the Capitol, looking down the mall to the Washington Monument. Their ancestors were Russian Jews, had been driven out of their country and came and found opportunity in the United States. So it's a way of completing a family story. Here's another picture of them at the White House. You can't get anywhere near that close to the White House now. But there they are standing at the marker that marks where all the roads start in the United States, which I find interesting, that the marker where all the roads start is home. It's someone's home. It's the president's home. So there they are becoming citizens by going to Washington, D.C. Other locations lured families where they taught their children history. I love this picture of the family sitting on the cannonballs at one of the national parks, taking them this is probably a Civil War site, teaching them about the war, about the battles that made America. The Lincoln Memorial, Lincoln's home, got a lot of visitors. But many of our nation's citizens at the time couldn't vacation freely. And this is a picture of a well-to-do African-American ophthalmologist and his family from Florida. And despite all of the consumer goods that they have, they're clearly participating in the American dream. They were humiliated on the road. And this is a picture of them swimming at a segregated beach, the Virginia beach, colored only, and swimming in a motel pool at a motel that was owned by African Americans and would allow them to swim there. And I'd like to just tell you about one family and their trip as they tried to find a place to stay on vacation, and tried to find housing. This was Ralph Sims and his family. He owned an appliance business worth $500,000, and he and his family were vacationing and trying to stay at a motel in St. Peters, Florida. And they pulled up in their new Chrysler, and I think Chrysler still means a big, nice car. And when Sims asked the price of a room for his family, the motel owner quoted the outrageous price of $50,000. Sims said he would pay double the rate that the proprietor charged others because, he said, I've got 2 kids out there, they haven't had a good meal all day, we're all exhausted, and we can't find any place to sleep. The motel manager refused, and as the story concludes, that night the Sims family, who were Negroes, a word at the time, tried to doze, curled up inside their parked car, counting the minutes until sunrise when they would begin hunting a colored restaurant for breakfast. So this was read into the Senate record by Senator Jacob Javits in the hearings for the Civil Rights Bill. Now you see on this slide also a picture of the Green Book. Have any of you heard of the Green Book? Okay, the Green Book was a guide for the African American traveler, and it was put together by Mr. Green, who was a letter carrier in New York. And he would go to these union meetings of African American letter carriers of America and collect from them information about where people could stay. And so he produced this booklet starting in 1936 until about 1965, listing where you could go and not be turned away, where you could go and avoid the humiliation of taking your family there, like the humiliation that Ralph Sims endured. So the Green Book is now digitized and on the site of the New York Public Library, and you'd be surprised to know that this was needed not only in the South, where segregation was legal, but also in places like New Mexico, in Arizona, and Las Vegas, because you could be turned away anywhere, Wyoming, California, anywhere. So this is a way that vacationing families avoided humiliation. And their stories, like the one I read to you that was cited by Senator Javits, were read into the record, and their plight of trying to get in a station wagon and vacation was brought home to the senators in the testimony. So I argue that the Civil Rights Bill passed in part because of the image of the family vacation, of the children in the car not having a place to sleep. And as the story is told on the Civil Rights Bill, you know, it was kind of languished during the Kennedy presidency, and President Lyndon B. Johnson had an experience that led him to take it up and champion it. And you know, it's passed in less than a year after Kennedy's assassination. And so in the biography of Johnson, written by Robert Cairo, he tells this story that the Johnsons had a cook and a maid. And so when the Johnsons flew from Texas to Washington, D.C. every year, their cook and their maid had to drive. They didn't fly, they had to drive. And one year, and you also remember, those of you who can remember back this far, that Johnson had beagles. Do you remember Johnson's dogs? Yes, very famous dogs. And so one year, LBJ, President Johnson, asked the Williams if they could take the beagles with them in the car so they wouldn't have to take them on the plane. And Johnson recalls this incident in his memoirs. And Gene, the man he asked, said, We drive for hours and hours. We get hungry, but there's no place on the road we can stop and go in and eat. We drive some more. It gets pretty hot. We want to wash up, but the only bathroom we're allowed in is usually miles off the main highway. We keep going till night comes, till we get so tired we can't stay awake anymore. We're ready to pull in, but it takes another hour or so to find a place to sleep. You see, what I'm saying is that a colored man's got enough trouble getting across the South on his own without having a dog along. And Johnson cited that as his aha moment, his epiphany, when he realized that as long as these people were prisoners in their own country, as long as they were unable to pursue this American dream of the open road and traveling freely, then he was also in chains. So the children went to vacation you take your children to vacation in Washington, D.C., and then at some point the West becomes the big destination. And it becomes the destination in part because of Hollywood, because of the Westerns. The Westerns were the top movie-going habit of Americans, and then they start slicing them up, and Hopalong Cassidy bought the rights of all his Westerns and sliced them up into TV shows. And I'll ask for another show of hands. How many of you had a cap gun? Okay, look around. Yes, I had a cap gun, I had a cowgirl outfits, I had boots, I had a skirt. Of course, girls didn't wear pants. We had skirts. And so everybody was into this Western scene. And you can see that Chrysler is marketing its car, is that a Chrysler? I think it is, with Western themes. So go west on vacation. And so people wanted to come west and experience the West like what they saw in the movies on television. And this is a picture of Annie Oakley. I did some research in the archives of Jean Autry at the Autry Museum. And this was all invented. This was her nephew who she took care of, all invented to attract children. And they wanted to come see these Western heroes. The first Western destination that arose was Knott's Berry Farm. And Walter Knott went out to Calico, you probably know this story, and bought Calico lock, stock, and barrel, and drove it in and parked it and established Knott's Berry Farm. It got its beginnings as a place to sell chicken dinners and, of course, to buy jam. And this was a favorite place for my husband's family, who's from LA, as he was growing up. And at Knott's Berry Farm of the 60s, these are pictures from Look magazine, see how Western you could be. You could pan for gold at Knott's Berry Farm. That's Western. And you could even become an Indian. That's Western. You could put on a headdress and play Indian at Knott's Berry Farm. Well, Knott's Berry Farm was in those days, very homey. I'm sure some of you could remember Knott's Berry Farm. It was a very frontier place to go. But then and you can have your picture taken, and those miners are still there. You can still have your picture taken with them. But Disneyland opened. Guesses, what year did Disneyland open? Anybody know? 55. Good for you. Okay, July 17th, 1955. The cement was still wet. Women got their heels stuck. The water fountains weren't on. The restrooms didn't work. But it was on TV. And Walt Disney, this is of course a brilliant story, Walt Disney had been playing with his children in Griffith Park and noticed that the playground was a little bit tawdry looking and not very safe. And he came up with this idea, born out of course, his train set in his backyard, to create a place for families to come. And Disneyland was thus born. And my husband and I are favorite attenders at Disneyland, even went back on the 50th anniversary. All kinds of families went to Disneyland. And the thing about Disneyland is it's an imitation West. You could ride a stagecoach in Disneyland. You could go out to Tom Sawyer's cabin, and mysteriously the Mississippi has been translated to the West. You could see the cabin burning. All of this was Western transplanted there. They had these animatronics, these fake animals and chipmunks and squirrels that you could see as you went by on the train. So Disneyland grew and included not only the West, but also Tomorrowland. which has become the dullest place to be since Now We Are In Tomorrow, as Disney conceived it. So Wernher von Braun and his rockets, you could take a rocket ride to the moon. All of this was directed at children and at families on vacation who came to Disneyland. So the focus here is on the children, changing stations for children, lost and founds for children, hot dogs, ice cream bars. It's all geared to the family vacation. Some families didn't want to partake in all that consumerism or couldn't afford to get themselves to Los Angeles. So they went back to nature, to camping. And camping had the advantage of being very reasonable, very reasonably priced. You didn't even have to buy a tent. You could rent a tent. And I want to pull a little bit out of the book from a family that went camping for the first time in July 1954. This is in the Ladies' Home Journal. And Dick and Gigi Williams took their two children, Dickie, age 5, and Leslie, age 7. And Leslie, who was 7, had been stricken by polio, and their trip was paid for by the National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis to give this family some time away. So they borrowed the gear. He was a fireman. They borrowed the gear, and they drove up to Yosemite from LA, which you could do at the time. They're all in their sleeping bags by 8:30 at night. But while they were asleep, a bear ate the food that they hung in a pack in the tree. So Dick and Gigi are cowering in the tent. A nearby camper scared the bear away by beating a dishpan with a wooden spoon. And they loved camping. She said, "This is less housework for me." And he liked being out with the children. They did the typical things. But she said, for housework, you just fold the pajamas, sweep out the tent, and you're gone. So it was a vacation for all of them to camp. And many families traveled in trailers, which reached their peak in the early 1960s, the sale of trailers. I think they're coming back a little bit. But this is the kind of camper that my family traveled in 1962 when we went to Yellowstone. And we were tumbling along in our camper through the Tetons, and my sisters and I'm one of 4 sisters, and we were sitting around the table in the camper playing cards. We were bored. And finally, my father, he keeps rapping on the window, and we don't pay any attention to him. So he pulls the camp over to the side of the road, and he opens the back door, and he says, "These are the Tetons. Look at these beautiful mountains. I brought you all this way to see these beautiful mountains." And we looked at him, and I turned to my sister, and I said, "It's your turn to deal." So do not be discouraged if your children do not enjoy the scenery like you do. The camping took off after the war in the national parks. 500,000 visitors flooded Grand Canyon in September 1946, and in the same year, 21.7 million people came to the national parks which had been shuttered during the war. People found here nature, but they also found here danger. And so it was always a tension between seeing the bears and seeing the hot pools and seeing Old Faithful and keeping the children safe. And the parks had a real problem keeping children safe. And you can see in this picture, many of you raised your hands when I asked about air conditioning. So today you'd think, well, how could they be so stupid as to have bears stick their hands in the car door? Well, you can see right here. The children are sitting in the back eating a cookie. The bear reached in his hand, took the cookie, and scratched the child. So just for fun, maybe it's a macabre sense of humor, when I was at the National Records Administration, I picked records for July 1955, and I counted and cataloged the injuries that came in July 1955 in the parks. And one story, a bear surprised a family at a picnic breakfast in 1963. The children ran for the station wagon. The mother tossed the sizzling frying pan on the floor, and then Mom turned around and began taking pictures of the bear attacking the ice chest. When the father failed to frighten away that bear by throwing rocks, he jumped in his car and drove toward the bear, honking his horn. They recovered the ice chest, but it was empty and so badly damaged that Dad reluctantly threw it in the next trash bin. So night after night, the bears would invade the campgrounds and get at people's food. And people would also feed the bears and cause this bear traffic jam. So Nancy Hendrickson reached out to pet a bear, and then she required 5 stitches. And one of the problems was the children were seeing bear cartoons like Yogi the Bear, and these bears were not really real to them. And it's really not until they start fining campers for touching the bears, getting near the bears, or feeding them that the number of bear injuries decreases. And if you've never read this great book, it's called Death in Yellowstone. I think there's a Death in Yosemite book too. But national parks were a way to go back to nature, but you really had to watch your children. They also had nature classes at Yellowstone where children could go out in nature and be taught by the park rangers. But if you notice from this photograph of the children playing along the Firehole River, they do seem to be largely unsupervised and could get into trouble. So while some families went camping and they went to the national parks, some families spent the summer in the country. And where I live in Utah, people either go up to Idaho or up to the canyons where it's cooler for their summers to the cabins. And so I studied the cabins and settlements in Minnesota. And this is a beautiful place in Minnesota. There are a lot of places up by the lakes where people could go, and they would just stay for a couple of weeks with their families and stay in these cabins, and then they would eat in the main lodge. And there are some we continue to go to Minnesota every summer, and I'll tell you some very, very fine food in those lodges. So in this way, parents could go to Gilman's and just send their children fishing. Here's another picture. So the children are just out canoeing. We don't know where the parents are. Maybe they're horseback riding. Maybe they're playing cards. But they're involved in their own pursuits, but it's safe enough there that you could just send your children out, and they would take care of the children there at the camp. And another place where people often went out up to the country was from New York City, and that is the Catskills. So I've spoken somewhat of the discrimination faced by African Americans on their vacations, and the same is true of Jewish families. Until the mid-50s, even until the early 1960s, they were often turned away, even from resorts like the Biltmore outside of Phoenix. There was rampant discrimination against Jews in America, a great deal of anti-Semitism, and they founded their own vacation colony in the Catskills. And this is a picture of one of the trophy presented to children who were swimming. So at Grossinger's, this large, if you've seen the movie Dirty Dancing, you have kind of an idea of this place, which is most people's cultural reference today. But they had these programs for the children, and the parents could play tennis and do what they wanted. And they also had, as you'll see in this picture, a costume contest for children in 1954 in which they're all dressed up. So the idea is to take your family on vacation, but you're beginning to see that maybe parents don't always want to be with their children all the time. So the Catskills, I think, is particularly apropos for you to know about because, of course, the Catskills is the birthplace of comedy, the Borscht Belt, comedy that then, and I'll read you these names, and these will be familiar to you, the Saturday Night Show featuring stars like Red Buttons, Roberta Peters, Jackie Mason, Vic Damone, Joan Rivers, Peter Nero, Tony Bennett, Gordon McRae, Diane Carroll, and Alan King. So when the Borscht Belt starts to go belly up in the 60s, where do these people come? They come to Las Vegas. The shows are in Las Vegas. So really, you could say that Las Vegas's comedy scene came out of the Borscht Belt in the Catskills. And as anti-Semitism decreased and those discriminatory practices were reduced, then the Borscht Belt itself began to shrivel up somewhat, and those places are no more, or they have been taken over. One of the advantages to taking your children to the Borscht Belt was that you could find a nice husband for your daughter. And this is a theme that I think we probably make fun of at the Catskills, but it's also true, I know, in my culture. You want to go to a place where your parents want you to go to a place where you can marry inside your faith. And that was also part of going to the Borscht Belt, to the Catskills. I haven't talked about Idlewild and some of the other vacation places that were exclusive to African Americans. Idlewild was in Michigan, and then of course in Martha's Vineyard there were vacation spots. So while it looks as like a very happy picture from here of families getting in station wagons, in reality it was a very difficult experience for African American families and for Jewish families. They could not participate in this idea fully of the open road. But I argue that it may have been those vacation experiences that drove them to fight for their rights, to want full and open access to society. So this family road trip, this middle-class road trip that really gets on its way after World War II, began to show signs of deflation in the early 70s. And vacations today have become shorter. Nobody has 2 weeks anymore, and partly because there's 2 earners in the family. And it's really not that fun to travel with a toddler who does not want to sit in a car seat all day. And depending on your orthodoxy about car seats, it can make a very unpleasant ride. Personally, I'm glad our children were raised before we had to do that. But I'm sure they're safer. A lot of internet marketing in vacations today. You can stop anywhere. Someday I'd like somebody to do a history of 7-Elevens, which is one of my favorite getaway spots. I love the Big Gulp. But you can go in there, and now you can get a 5-course meal in 7-Eleven, really. And so there's a lot of fast food, a lot of convenience. And today, as popularized in the movie Little Miss Sunshine, you can just put your headset on, and the children will disappear into their own worlds. My own grandchildren travel around in these vehicles with these DVDs that flip down. So the rise in the price of gas was one reason why family vacations as car trips began to decline in the early 1970s. Also, the whole family ideal, they had to be together all the time, began to be tarnished. All those quick marriages after the war, a lot of them began to unravel and fall apart. And the whole idea of couples vacations came up, couples getaways. I think it happens about the same time. It's part of the sexual revolution, and it's also, I think, at the same time that Hawaii comes as this exotic, lush destination for couples. And Virginia is for lovers. That slogan is founded about this time. So the family ideal gives way to a more segmented vacation of mom and dad getting away, repairing all the damage the children have done by being away for a few days. And but I wonder if it's coming back. I have a niece who lives in Omaha. They piled all their kids in the family van and drove out to California last year. And some days when I'm on an airplane and a family's vacationing on the airplane, I kind of wish they were back in the car, where I don't have to be part of what's going on in their family on their vacation. So vacations have really changed, I think, quite a bit. And then, as you see in this cartoon by Roz Chast, at some point, your children do not want to vacation with you anymore. In fact, as the boy's T-shirt says, I'm here with my parents, but really I'm not. They don't, and those of you who experience this know that your children start walking about 6 steps behind you, so no one thinks they're with you. And so the family vacation kind of starts to be not such an object, not such an ideal way to spend the family's money. But my husband and I, as former baby boomers, Disneyland goers, growing up in the back seat of the car, now, let's see if I've got this, now go on vacation with our grandchildren. And this is a picture of us with our grandchildren after having climbed Delicate Arch in Utah. So if you are a baby boomer, I'll bet you're going on vacation with your grandchildren And guess what? Now you're in the back seat. Thank you.